as fate had it, FDR died in April of 1945. And that brings us to Harry Truman taking over. Now, I am not one to fault Truman for what became of Vietnam. He was dealt a very difficult hand. There's no doubt about that. And he made the best decisions he thought were necessary at the time, which included quickly reassuring the French of their rule in Vietnam. And on September 7th, just 7 days after Ho Chi Minh declared the Declaration of Independence, U.S. vessels were transporting French troops back into southern Vietnam. Then the Chinese allied troops were coming south from the north, from the southern part of China, and they were coming into northern Vietnam to keep the post-war peace. And suddenly Ho Chi Minh and his regime was kind of caught in the middle. What is going to happen? The U.S. helping the French back in. The Chinese are there. Who knows what's going to happen? And suddenly the Ho Chi Minh regime is marginalized, and Ho Chi Minh writes letters to Truman. They all went unanswered. And eventually in 1946, we have the Vietnamese declaring war, a war of resistance against the French. So the French came back in, took complete control of all three regions of Vietnam, and that led to the 1946 to 1954 French Indochina War. And another crazy fact of history is that war was completely bankrolled by, drum roll please, the United States of America. We like to bankroll wars. Bankroll wars, I think I said that wrong. We like to bankroll wars, don't we? Wow. So you see how this works? We trained the Vietnamese. We trained Ho Chi Minh and his troops. And now we are paying the French to fight the Vietnamese that we just finished training. This is not going to end well, people. Do we understand that? A couple years go along, the war drags on. What's happening in China? 1949, the Chinese communists take over in mainland China. 1950 to 1953, we have the Korean War kicking off as a way to stop the expansion of communism. The French Indochina War ended with the French's defeat at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. We have the Geneva Convention, which splits Vietnam in half, which eventually leads to the Vietnam War as we know it. And it leads to Kennedy sending in advisors, Johnson escalating, Nixon bombing and trying to bring it to an end. It's easy. And I feel compelled to wonder, would it have been different if FDR, if Roosevelt had survived in 45? Maybe. Maybe not. Of course, we'll never know. But what would have happened if we upheld a few common principles that FDR had? The right to a people, the right to a people's self-determination, the utter dislike of colonialism. Those principles laid out in the Declaration of Independence. What if we would have held up those principles at the end of 1945? Would there have been a chance? Would we have had a chance of avoiding the Vietnam War? The Vietnam War didn't start in the 1960s. Its roots, like that banyan tree in Tân Châu, reached far back into the past. It truly started in 1945. Now, it's safe to say that I used to be a typical hawk when it comes to U.S. foreign policy. You know, you hear those terms, the hawk versus the dove, the hawk, which are a little more aggressive, wanting to defend everything and be strong military. And the dove is like, oh, we need to not be so aggressive overseas and whatnot. I was definitely a hawk for a long time. But since my years in Vietnam and watching everything that has ensued since then, I have slowly changed away from that mode of thinking. And I've become very skeptical of it all. I'm skeptical of any politician who bangs the drum for yet another war. There are way too many Washingtonians that thrive off of what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. Too many are invested in the massive military budget. I personally would welcome a little more introspection in our foreign policy. I mean, you can't even question the military budget without seemingly damaging your patriotism, according to some people's point of view. I'm not sure that we've really reimagined U.S. policy that much since the Vietnam War. Sure, there are some differences, and many will argue that one time period can't be compared to the other. But yet, here we are. Kosovo, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine. What's next? Taiwan? North Korea? John Quincy Adams said this. We're talking about the United States, this beautiful entity that was created back in the 18th century. We do not go in search of monsters to destroy. I wish that were the case today. And here's a closing thought for you. Why don't we get Main Street USA in order first, before we're off chasing down the next monster?